trip. He traveled all the way over there. They had guides, and it was several days, but he went all the way to the top of Kilimanjaro. And when he was telling me the story, it made me feel adventurous, and I wanted to summit Kilimanjaro because it sounded awesome. And he said, "No, you can't do that." I thought, "Well, why can't I do that?" Is it because I'm out of shape? He said, "Yeah." He said, "But also, you might have troubles because you're diabetic. And a lot of people have problems with getting hypoxic when they get at the upper elevations." He said what they do is they actually take a little dot of your blood and they test it to see if there's enough oxygen in the blood. And if there's not enough oxygen in the blood, they won't let you finish. He said, so, diabetics struggle with that kind of stuff. And so he said, well, so you might pay all this money to go to the other side of the planet, spend days and all this time with all these people trying to get to the top, and then part way up, they just tell you can't go the rest of the way, and you have to wait for everybody else. And then when we come back down from the summit, we'll make fun of you because you're a loser and you didn't summit Mount Kilimanjaro. I said, yeah, I probably won't go now. Yeah. They were talking to one of the guys who summited Everest. Now, right now, when you summit Everest, you get a huge team that goes with you. It's a huge tourist industry. You get tons of guides. You got top-of-the-line gear. We have super high-tech, winter clothing. We got super high-tech oxygen tanks. I mean, you might as well just take a jetpack to the top of Everest now. But in the old school, they had no oxygen. They didn't have high-tech microfiber, all kinds of crazy gear. They just had themselves, their lungs, and a couple of guides, and they just went for it. And a lot of people have died summiting Everest. They talked to one of the first guys, I don't know if it's Edmund Hillary or somebody else who said this, but they were talking to one of the first guys who summited Everest, and they asked him, why did you do this? What's the motivation? Like, why would you travel into Asia to make this perilous trip just to go to the top of a mountain? And he said, because it was there. Isn't that just the most OG answer? Because it was there. That's the only reason. That's all it took for motivation for him. He knew it was the highest mountain on the planet. He just wanted to hike it. Psychologists for a long time have been studying motivation and why people do what they do. And the idea is if we figure out why people make the decisions they make, we can help them make better decisions. Or at least good decisions, end up with the life they want. And so, for example, you have one guy in psychological history. He said, people make decisions just based on reward and punishment. If you get rewarded for a behavior, you do it more. If you get punished for another behavior, you do it less. And he famously proclaimed, if you give me a kid just through reward and punishment, and I can control their environment, I can make them excel at any profession they want. I can make them good at anything, just through motivation, through reward and punishment. The problem is, that's not true. Like for me, I could never be an elite marathon runner. Now I know what you're saying, Kenji, don't be hard on yourself. If you just believed enough and trained enough, you could dance with the High Russian ballet, No, I couldn't. No, and I never could have. What they're learning is that there's a reason some kids like football, and there's a reason some kids like cross country. And the reason kids like football is because they're big and they're good at crushing people. The reason people like cross country is because they're skinny and they can just ride the wind to the end of the race, right? We're talking about two different populations here. And kids tend to kind of gravitate towards the activities they like, so I guess that's its own reward. But the reason the reason they like activities is because they tend to be good at certain ones. So a lot of kids tend to do the things they like to do. And so it doesn't really matter how much reward and punishment you do. You're not going to take somebody who could be an elite cross-country runner and make them an elite center in the NFL. Right? It's just not going to happen. It turns out we do have temperaments we're born with. We do have tendencies and talents we're born with. And so punishment and reward doesn't motivate all behavior. It's a factor, but it doesn't motivate everything. What's another thing people have done to try to figure out? Another idea, so that's the idea that punishment and reward is what determines behavior. Another one is that a sense of accomplishment is why people do something. Like if they're good at something and they like doing it and they're strong at it, maybe it's the accomplishment of being a good football player or a good cross-country runner. Maybe that's what motivates people's behavior. If they gravitate towards things they're talented in and they're good at, and then they get a sense of accomplishment. But that's not true. And I know that's true because not only do highly accomplished overachievers exist, but professional wrestling also exists. Now, do you know how many hours of professional wrestling is on TV every week? I didn't either, because I don't watch it, because I'm always reading my Bible, and praying. But I have friends, they're Jimmy and Sarah, they're totally into professional wrestling, and they watch as much as they can. They spend days every week watching professional wrestling. Do you know some of the programs are 6 hours long? They just sit there and watch it. I honestly can't sit through a football game because that's too long for me. But they can sit through just pro wrestling day after day. And there's people I know who have seen somehow every TV series that has ever been made by anybody ever. Like, doesn't matter what platform, what series, they've seen it all. And I know people who just watch a TV show on repeat over and over and over and over again. Some of you are those sickos, right? Honestly, who watches TV shows over and over again? Okay, yeah, I see there's some. My wife does that. And she says it's relaxing because I'm not stressed out about what's going to happen because I know what's going to happen. So I just watch it and I relax. It's like, that makes a lot of sense, actually. But what do people accomplish watching so much TV? Nothing. And I'm not judging that. I'm just pointing out its reality. That many people are motivated not to be accomplished. And so accomplishment doesn't drive a person's desire to sit in front of the TV hours every day. In fact, if you check the screen time on your phone, I would venture to guess that is not all productivity, right? So it's not accomplishment that drives behavior. What is it? Super complicated question. I think they're still figuring it out. But in this passage, we zoom in on the story of two different people. And what motivates their behavior is faith. Faith is what motivates them. It's not a sense of accomplishment. It's not rewarded pleasure. It's not any other, multivariate combination of things. It's faith. So I want to get in this passage. I don't have a conversation about faith today. And I want us to see if we can figure out what is faith. Like, what is it? That's a word that gets thrown around a lot. But what does it actually mean? So let's go to Matthew chapter 9. We'll walk through this passage again. And remember, right before this, Jesus is having a conversation, right? He's at a party. There's a bunch of tax collectors and sinners there, some religious people. John's disciples came. They had a conversation with him. So people are just coming in a line and just talking to Jesus. So in this line, Jesus is there in the party. And he just talked about the wineskin thing. You guys remember that? And can't put an old cloth or a new cloth on old cloth, and you can't put new wine in old wineskins. So as he was saying that, it says here, verse 18, as Jesus was saying this, the leader of a synagogue came and knelt before him. My daughter has just died, but you can bring her back to life if you just come and lay your hand on her. So this guy shows up for a miracle. And we see he's a synagogue leader, so he leads the church, right? And he goes to this party where Jesus is at, and he kneels before Jesus in front of everybody. And he asks him for this miracle. My daughter's dead. She's already died. Can you come and heal her? Or raise her back to life? It's not a healing at this point, is it? So Jesus and his disciples got up, and they went with him. Just then, a woman who had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding came up behind him. She touched the fringe of his robe, for she thought, if I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed. So here's the situation we have. There's some ancient context that'll help us kind of get what's going on here. This is very bizarre that a woman would approach and touch a man in public. And especially that this woman would touch Jesus in particular, because she had been plagued with constant bleeding, which in the ancient world was a big problem. We'll talk about that in a minute. And Jesus is this very holy, righteous, religious figure. People called him rabbi. They called him, teacher. They show signs of respect. So he's a very high-status man in a very patriarchal world. And this woman approaches him, and she touches actually, the Greek word, it specifies it's the most religious part of his clothes. There's tassels on the bottom of the robe, and she comes up and she grabs the tassels. So it's like if someone came up and they grabbed the collar of a Catholic priest. Something like that, you know. It's the most religious part of what he's wearing. So she goes and she does that. And this is bizarre for several reasons. One reason this is bizarre is because she sneaks up on him. Do you notice that? She like comes up behind him. You know, it's like, if I can just touch his clothes, that'll be great. You know, she had a knife. You think something totally different was going on. But she sneaks up on him, which is weird. But also, in the ancient world, it was very inappropriate for women to address men in public. Let me tell you why. My house is my castle and my sanctuary. And sometimes people violate that holy space. Like when roofer guys come by to give an estimate, right? It's like, what are you doing at my house? I didn't invite you. I didn't call you. You know, why are you here? This is my space. This is my time. And the home has gotten much more private over the last generation or so. And you can see this in many ways. Like back in the day, we used to build porches where people could sit on the front, and it was kind of an extension of the living room to the world. Now we build decks in the back with privacy fences and screens that cover everything. You know, we used to have dining rooms with a big table and too many seats around it, so when people came by, they could eat with us. And now we have movie theaters in our houses instead. So in architecture, you see this change. And you see this change culturally. Like, it used to be very common to have people over to your house to eat. You know, now we go to restaurants and eat there instead. We don't go to each other's homes as much. If somebody comes, even if somebody knows, they come knock on your door just to visit, like, what are you doing? Why? You didn't call first, so I could tell you not to come over? You know? Are you busy? No, I just don't want to see any of you, you know? It's like, why are you here? You just feel violated, even though it's a friend, somebody you know. And it used to be people could just drop by and visit and unannounced. I mean, things have just changed. So take that sense of violation when somebody violates your space and take it up a few notches. Like, let's imagine this. Let's imagine you're having a bachelorette party, okay? Traditionally, that's just women. That's still the case, right? It's been a while since I've been married. And I've never been invited to one, so I don't really know. Or like a bridal shower or a baby shower. I know you do it with both parents now, but man, if you go, we judge you. Let's say there's a bridal shower. It's just ladies. They're doing whatever ladies do at bridal showers in the basement of a friend's house. And then suddenly, I show up, right? Just open the door. Y'all having nachos? Just come inside, start eating the nachos, right? Oh, yeah. And I just include myself in that space. That doesn't feel right. Like it's weird, right? So in the ancient world, women had a very private world where they just interacted with women. And that private world in the house actually extended in everybody's minds out into public. So when women were in public, they actually weren't in public. They were in the private space of their home outside. Does that make sense? So when women interacted with each other in the Greco-Roman world, they typically just interacted with other women in these spaces out in public. And a man usually wouldn't interfere with that. They could, but you know what would never happen? A space of men out in public, and a woman would interfere with that. This is a different time, right? Women, you were the property of your husbands, or your fathers, till you got married. Then you were the property of your husbands. Right? It's a different time. So imagine a woman in this world sneaking up behind Jesus, then touching him. It's bizarre. It's actually super rude and obnoxious is what it is. So she comes up, she sneaks up on Jesus, she touches him, and Jesus turns around, and what do you expect him to do? Oh, you can, right? Let's see what he actually does. She says, if I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed. Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, daughter, be encouraged. Your faith has made you well. And the woman was healed at that moment. That's how Jesus reacts. So he turns around, and he's his father, he's rabbi, he's teacher, he's religious guy. He didn't say, what are you doing? He says, daughter. I love my daughters. That's a term of affection. He says, daughter, be encouraged. Not afraid, be encouraged. Your faith has made you well. In a minute, we'll finish the story when he actually gets to the house of the other guy. Or should we do it now? I need a vote. Now or later, the rest of the story. Who's in favor of now? Who's in favor of later? Okay, then now let's have it. So this is what happens in the rest of the story. So Jesus goes on from there. And just to remind you, a lot of you are importing Mark or other Gospels into the story. But Matthew wrote this a specific way on purpose, right? So you notice in Matthew's version, there's not tons of people around Jesus when he heals the woman. She's not pushing through tons of people that they mention. It's just Jesus, the disciples, and the synagogue leader. So all these bros having bro time, talking about how to modify their motorcycles, right? She comes in, asks for a healing, and then he turns around and speaks with her, and it's a very intimate moment, just the two of them. So then they go on from there, and they go to the official's house. This is the guy that asked Jesus to raise his daughter from the dead. They left the party, met the woman, healed her, and now they're at this guy's house. When Jesus arrived at the official's home, he saw the noisy crowd and heard the funeral music. That shows you that the girl was already dead. In the ancient world, they would mourn loudly and wildly, and they would just let their grief out. And they would do it together. And I don't know about you, but if my daughter died in the 7th grade, I would be absolutely undone. Like, I just wouldn't know how you would come back from that. And so they're here, and they're all just expressing this grief. And have you ever been sad, and when you're sad, you listen to sad music so you can feel the sad more sadly? You guys ever do that? Well, that's what they're doing. They have this funeral music, and they would bring in musicians, and they'd play this sad minor key music so that they could feel the grief even more and express it even more, and everyone just wail. And it was just everybody was screaming, and they were just overwhelmed with grief. So Jesus walks into the scene. She's already dead. Everybody's mourning, and he says, "Get out. Get out of here. Kick bricks," right? He says, "Get out." And here's his explanation. The girl isn't dead. She's only asleep. Now, I had a friend who told me, well, yeah, they just thought she was asleep because they're stupid primitive cavemen. They don't have technology like us. Which is an interesting thought. Let's test it. In large part in our culture, we outsource death. And the narrative around death that we have in our culture is that death is a medical failure. Right? That's the story. In the ancient world, they didn't have hospitals or all this crazy technology. They didn't have all the medical technology we have. They didn't even know about germs. They didn't know what caused infections. They had nothing to treat infections with. Lots of people died from infections. We're going to circle back to the lady with bleeding and talk about why that's important with her. There were rules about all this stuff because they didn't understand it. And most people died in the home with each generation on each side of them at the home. And people commonly died younger than now because of infections and other things we can treat now they couldn't treat then. So people would die back then, and they would die in the home, and people saw death a lot. It wasn't just medical professionals that witnessed it. The families were around when it happened. And now we can have a kid living in another state and they hear something's happening, they're on their way. But in this world, everybody's world was very small. No cars, no planes, no trains, no automobiles, right? People walked everywhere. And so when you had a life, your life was very close to the life of your relatives. And a lot of times that life was in the same house. You'd have multiple generations in one house. I don't know why we stopped doing that. I think it's a shame, actually. But having multiple generations in the house for most of history and most cultures has been the norm. It's only in the modern day we've had so much wealth that we can just have a place of our own and then extra places at the lake. and then take vacations in other countries and stuff. Like that hasn't been a thing for most of human history. So everyone's world was very small, and they were very close together. So when somebody died, everybody was there. And so I don't know, man. I think they probably knew more about death than we do. They were closer to it. So I don't buy it. They were here, and this father who lost a daughter was devastated. And Jesus tells him to get out, saying she's just asleep. Well, now she's just asleep because Jesus is in the room, right? Well, yeah, he shows up. He can call it sleep because he's about to do something about it. Here's what happens. The crowd laughed at him. They might have literally laughed, but they just mocked him. They didn't believe him. They thought he was an idiot. But he kicked him out anyway. After the crowd was put outside, however, Jesus went in, took the girl by the hand, and she stood up. She arose. She raised from the dead, right? The report of this miracle swept through the entire countryside, as it probably should have. So we have two stories here. And there's one more underlayment before I bring this home that I want to highlight culturally. And that underlayment is the idea of clean and unclean, and ritual purity and impurity. So we see a woman who had a medical condition and she was healed. And we see a girl who had a medical condition of death and was resuscitated, raised from the dead. So we see two medical problems that were fixed. That's not how they would have seen it when they were reading the story when it was first written. They would have seen it more as purity and impurity and like ritual stuff. Here's an example. To relate to this, I want to give you a hypothetical situation to see if you can put yourself in the shoes of these people. You guys with me? Okay. Imagine, if you can, a world where, I don't know, maybe people suddenly become afraid of germs. Just if you can imagine this. People become afraid of germs and sickness spreading. And so new values and new mores and new rituals come into the culture to help cope with this new fear. Such as, I don't know, maybe staying 6 feet away from everybody. Something like that, just off the top of my head, right? Or what if, I don't know, people wore masks by themselves in their car, right? What if that was the new thing? What if that was the way to live? And what if new morals and values came up around this and you would judge people based on how pure or impure they were? What if you judged somebody who refused to wear masks or they stood a little too close? I'm obviously not talking about hypothetical. I was at Costco once, and this is like right when everyone could go shopping again. So, of course, I was at Costco because the bakery section is amazing. So I was there, and I wanted to get to, that bread they had for a while that had like tons of butter and sugar and cinnamon in the bread? It's so good. And if you microwave it for a little bit, I mean, I don't eat it because I'm a vegetarian, but it's really good. I'm a vegan, yeah, because there's butter. I can't. So, but I wanted to get to that when I was still a sinner. And the aisle was clogged with people. And they were, I don't know, the people with the least kinesthetic awareness seem to go shopping at the same time as me, and they all go to Costco. Right? It's like, why are you standing in the middle of the aisle with your cart sideways? Like, other people exist. I'm a Christian, so I don't kick the cart over and tackle them. But, and I would never imagine doing that because of my holiness. But I thought, I need to get to that loaf of butter, sugar, cinnamon. And nobody's moving. And so I had a brilliant thought. And I just went, it's like Moses splitting the Red Sea, dude. This lady just turned around and took off. She adjusted her mask, and everyone was split. And I was like, going to my bread. I was a genius. And I bought 2 loaves just because I deserved it. So in Jesus' day, they would judge people based on how pure or impure they were and how sanitary or not they were. But there was that huge moral layer of judgment over it. So if you were bleeding, you actually had to quarantine yourself and you couldn't be around people for like a week. Which means if you're bleeding for 12 years, It's been 12 years since you've been around people. And we know something of the loneliness of being isolated from other people, right? So for 12 years, she couldn't even be with family or people close to her. She was isolated. She was unclean. So I know I mentioned it was obnoxious because she came up and snuck up on him, and because she's a woman entering a man's space in that world, but she was actually going to make Jesus unclean by touching him. I mean, it was the audacity of speaking to a man in public, but she was going to physically touch him, and she was going to make him unclean, which means Jesus was supposed to quarantine himself after that. And he didn't. Instead, he goes to this house with this other people. Also, so when Jesus healed her, by the way, he wasn't just giving her health. He was giving her life back. And she could be with people again. She could be close to other human beings again. She could touch and hug and sit close to somebody she cared about. He gave that all back to her. And then he goes to the synagogue leader's house, and his daughter's dead. And another rule back then is you weren't supposed to touch dead people or even be close to them. But touching them was a huge no-no. Definitely breaks the rule, right? For us, if you're around somebody who had some kind of sickness, and then you're not supposed to go out and go shopping afterward, right? You're supposed to quarantine yourself to make sure it doesn't spread any further. Well, back then, if you touched a dead person, you were supposed to, but it wasn't just a health thing. Again, there was this huge moral layer over it. You were a bad person if you went out and did these other things. And so Jesus, he touches her, lays his hand on her, he takes her by the hand. But in both these situations, Jesus doesn't become unclean. They get healed. And so in the story, you see that when Jesus touches the ugly things of this world and the ugly parts of us, it's not God who becomes unclean, but we're the ones who become clean. So we're the ones who get raised back to life. It's interesting what Jesus says to the woman in particular. Daughter, be encouraged. Your faith has made you well. I think it's dumb to think if you touch some magical shirt, you're going to be healed. Like, that seems like a scam, right? If a guy came on with a commercial and he said, hey, I have a magical robe, and if you just grab the tassels on this robe, whatever sickness you have, it'll be gone. With 3 easy payments in $19.95, right? I mean, I'd be like, yeah, okay, buddy, nice try. And when she gets healed, Jesus doesn't turn around and say, daughter, be encouraged. My magical robe that you touched made you well. That's not what he said, right? In the midst of all this ritual impurity and all this crazy social things going on, he said, it's your faith that made you well. So let's talk about that for a second. What is he talking about? Like, we say the word faith all the time, so we think we know what it means, but do we? Like, if faith has made her well, what are we talking about when we talk about the thing that made her well? When we talk about faith, what is it? You know, as a new Christian, I remember the way it happened. I was at a church, this preacher was preaching, and he said, there's 4 spiritual laws, right? You guys with me? There's 4 spiritual laws, and he went through them, and he said, now if you say this prayer in faith, you're golden. And that was good news for me, because going to hell sounded really bad, right? I was like, that's not a good way to spend a weekend. And if I had faith, whatever that is, then I wouldn't be going to hell and burning in fire forever. This preacher was teaching me a lot of stuff. And so I was like, if I had faith, then that won't happen. Good. I want the thing. The thing, it turns out, was believing 4 spiritual laws. So if I intellectually assented to a handful of things, I had faith. And then as I became more spiritual as a Christian, I went to church and I became more churchy, churchy Nita, right? And I started learning how church works. I learned there's a couple more rules. Not rules, but a couple more things to believe. There's a couple more intellectual propositions which you should intellectually assent to. Such as, evolution is false. Right? It's false. All good Christians think that. You only listen to Christian music. which at the time was a dismal prospect. Like, the Christian scene is blown up, but the musicality then, everyone was trying to be good secular artists, but they were bad at it, you know? They weren't doing their own thing. And so it was just not awesome. So I was like, oh, man, I guess Satan gets all the good music. And so, but, you know, I'm a Christian. And so I will believe that. And I started learning all these church things I was all supposed to think. What's another one? Oh, good Christians don't drink at all, ever. Later they clarified I could have water, and that helped. I'm just kidding. But there were all these rules, right? And intellectual things I had to believe in. That the Bible is an inerrant, infallible, inspired Word of God, without error or contradiction anywhere, okay? That's another thing to lodge into my intellectual mind. Before I was a Christian, I was at a party. And I actually never drank or did a lot of drugs, did any drugs, actually. I just didn't want to. And so at parties, though, I was at a party, and I was like the only sober one there. Everybody else was just wasted. And my friend Cammie, I'd known her for months, had no idea she was a Christian. No idea at all. And she's wasted already, right? And so the topic of evolution came up. I don't remember how. I just remember that's when I found out that Cammie was a Christian. Because she said, "You believe in evolution?" I was like, "Yeah, why not?" She goes, "Well, God says 6 days, and I don't believe we came from monkeys." Right? So for Cammie, I had no idea she was a Christian. But apparently faith was intellectually believing a handful of things. And then when one of those things comes up in conversation, faith meant having the right opinion about that thing. That was faith. Otherwise, her life was basically untouched by God, as far as I could tell. I mean, as an atheist, I was more Christian at this party than she was. And I remained more Christian the rest of the night than she did. I mean, I didn't see the point, right? Don't worry, I'm a Christian now. It worked out. But that's one idea, is that if you intellectually believe a handful of things, that's faith. Now you got it. Put it in your pocket. Pull it out when you need to. Okay, another perspective of faith that I ran into later is faith is it's assurance. It's confidence. It's certainty. I remember a friend was telling me, you know, you should have assurance that God loves you, that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, and you should be assured that you have the Holy Spirit. It's like, assurance? Insurance? Like, what are you talking about? Didn't know what the word meant. And so here's what assurance is, as far as I could tell. Assurance is this feeling. It's like this confidence. It's, you know, that's assurance. It's confidence and certainty. Like, it's just feeling that way. And so that means we should believe the promises of God, right? We should believe them. But what does believe mean? Apparently believe means having a lot of confidence that it's going to happen that way. So I have a friend, he prayed with faith. He prays with the faith of God. And what that meant is he prayed with faith that God was going to do what he was asking him to do, and he felt confident that that was going to be the case. But if he wasn't confident, he didn't pray with any faith. So faith in this spiritual tradition is a feeling. And a lot of people, they come to church and they're like, church wasn't successful. Why not? Because I didn't feel anything. Faith didn't happen today. Preacher was boring, which if I apologize, I probably am. But they just say, I just didn't get anything out of it. Or people will say you lack faith because you don't have confidence that something's going to happen. You're afraid, so you lack faith because you don't have confidence in God. And confidence is this feeling. You don't have a lack of anxiety, right? You're not assured. You're not certain. And so in evangelicalism, in our church tradition, when we say faith, a lot of times we don't mean you should have faith. You should have more emotional certainty. And faith is defined as certainty. So all these intellectual propositions I got, now I had to layer on a bunch of certainty too. So what happens if I read the Bible and I'm like, I don't know, man, this is confusing. It's confusing because in Mark, the little girl wasn't dead yet. And in Matthew, she's already dead. So who's telling the truth? Is that a contradiction? And people would say, how come you're worried about that? Do you lack faith? Aren't you certain? I'm like, I'm just trying to learn the Bible, dude. Like, I take the Bible very seriously. Do you? Yeah, so I commit a huge part of my life to studying it. Whatever the Bible teaches, that's what I'm going to go with. I just want to know what it teaches. It takes a lot of work to know that. So it turned out that I was supposed to have intellectual certainty and all these emotional certainty and all these intellectual things they taught me, and if I didn't, I lacked faith. And some of you people have taught you have to have a certain kind of spiritual experience, otherwise you're not a full Christian. Maybe you don't have the full gospel, right? Because you didn't feel it enough. How come you just don't feel it? What's wrong with you? What is faith in this passage? Faith isn't just believing a handful of things intellectually so you have the right opinion when they come up. And faith isn't feeling it. Can I be just human for a minute? Like, I don't always feel God. I just don't. You know, I'm not always overwhelmed by an ecstatic experience of God's presence when I pray. Sometimes I feel like I'm just talking to myself. So do I lack faith in those moments because I'm not feeling it? Yeah, so sometimes I do feel it though. Sometimes I feel God's presence. But then sometimes I don't. So wait, do I have faith when I'm over here but not faith when I'm here? Right? And so does my spiritual life consist in me trying to manufacture this feeling so I can feel like I have faith? So I have this insecure life all the time when I'm trying to feel the right way. Then I feel the wrong way and I pretend I don't feel that way, so I'm living a lie. I mean, it's a mess, right? So let's fix it today. Let's figure out what faith is in this passage. Then we'll just go with this for the week. How's that sound? In this passage, faith is something that motivates you to act. See, it was faith that motivated the father to go see Jesus. And it was faith that motivated the woman to be like a healing assassin with Jesus. And here's the thing to know about faith, is we all have faith. The question isn't do we have faith, the question is what do we have faith in? You're all people of great faith. Just what do you have faith in? You know that gap between what we know and how we have to live? For me, that's about 98% of my life. I don't know about you. But I know that much, and I still have to live the rest of it. I just got to figure it out. You know, that's a gap. And at some point, you have to make a leap of faith. And you get to decide what you're jumping onto. You get to decide what you're jumping onto in that leap of faith. So, anytime you get married, that's a leap of faith. You're thinking, yeah, this will probably work for the rest of my life, despite all the ups and downs and catastrophes we'll inevitably face and the difficulty of merging two personalities into one. It'll be fine. Why will it be fine? Because I'm really happy today. Right? The reason you get married young is because you're too dumb not to do it. That's the grace of God. But that's a huge act of faith. When you have kids, that's an act of faith. I had a friend conversation. They said, I don't see how somebody could bring a kid into this world. It's so selfish. Like, how could you bring a kid into this world? And I thought, you should give it a shot because you never asked such a stupid question if you did it. I promise you, children make this world so much more beautiful. Children will make your life so much more happier, even when they don't. Like, seriously. And the idea that you were somehow brilliant and tougher than the next generation, and that's why this world existed for another generation, come on, man. They'll figure it out. They'll figure it out. My kids, I guarantee you, are smarter than I was at their age. I promise you. Don't tell them I said that, but it's true. Like, they got a head start on me. They'll be fine. But when you have kids, that's a huge act of faith because you don't know all the variables. You don't even know if it's going to go to term. You don't know if it's going to be healthy after you have it. You don't know if people are going to like it or not. You don't know what school they're going to go to. You don't. I mean, there's just so much you don't know, and you jump. And you jump, and some of us jump several times. But that's your life, isn't it? Like you're always jumping into the unknown because there's no other way to do it. But the thing you jump onto is the thing you have faith in. That's what motivates you to act in a certain way. Let me put a little more flesh on this from a pastoral perspective. So, some people have faith in a particular drug of choice to deliver them from pain. We can all agree that life is suffering, right? There's a lot of pain in life. And one way to deal with that pain is just to overwhelm it with chemicals. Just brute force. Just get some stuff to your brain somehow, whether you eat it or drink it or snort it, whatever. It could be Twinkie, could be meth, right? It could be alcohol. It could be Twinkie flavored alcohol while you're smoking meth or shooting meth, preferred choice, whatever. I mean, it could be whatever. But you just overwhelm the pain and escape from it with this chemical break. So what a person is doing in that situation is they need to be saved from something. They need to be saved from a life that's filled with pain. And they go to somebody or something in faith for salvation. And in that case, what do they jump on? They jump towards or into addiction. And I think, this will save me. And for a while, it works. The downside is it takes the rest of your life away from you. And I've seen people sacrifice way more to the drug of choice than I've seen other people sacrifice to God. I've seen people sacrifice their health, their families, their relationships, just to escape the pain. And I get it, man. If you're in recovery, I get it. This is not easy, this thing called life. But that's one example of somebody putting their faith into something. Another example could be somebody who just decides that they're going to outwork whatever they need to be saved from. And so they just work all the time. And it seems noble, doesn't it? Working a lot, providing for the family. But they work so much they never are there for the family. And so in the process of providing for the family, they sacrifice their family. And so what are they jumping into to kind of give them a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, a sense of importance? Maybe a sense of escape from the home, which they don't like. It could be anything. But they have a problem, and to seek salvation, they put their faith in work to do that. And there's a million ways we could crack this down. A million ways we could break this down if we wanted to. But everybody has faith, and faith is that thing that helps you to choose between options, and it motivates you to act. Faith is the thing that has you choose one road instead of the million infinite possibilities that lay beside it. We jump into the dark all the time. So what these two people did in this passage is they jumped into Jesus. The synagogue ruler went to Jesus, and he asked Jesus to save him. Jesus did. She came to Jesus for healing, and her faith made her well. Let me say this real quick. Is faith always present when miracles happen? No. So remember when Jesus raised someone else from the dead, this guy named Lazarus? Now Lazarus was dead in the tomb, wrapped up, cold, just chilling, right? Lazarus was dead. How motivated to act was Lazarus in that moment? No. How much faith did Lazarus have being dead guy laying there in the tomb? Zero, right? How much faith did his sisters have? Jesus showed up and they said, they had a lot of faith, but in the wrong thing. They're like, if only you had been here. If you came earlier, he was sick, he would have been fine. You could have healed him. That would have been awesome. But now he's dead. We're cooked. We're burnt. Too bad you can't do anything about it now, right? There wasn't any faith in that situation. There was just Jesus deciding to act. So Faith doesn't always need to be present for miracles to happen. Sometimes miracles happen in the absence of faith. Sometimes they affect it. We don't know how this works. I'm telling you, we don't know how this works. I know the Bible. We don't know how this works. Sometimes in Nazareth, he can't do miracles because of his faith. Sometimes he does it just because he feels like it anyway. Just to make people who don't believe in him look stupid. He's done this before. And so I don't get the math, man. Nobody does. And here's another thing. Just because a miracle didn't happen for you, it didn't mean you lacked faith. Didn't mean you lacked faith. I don't know what it takes to twist the arm of God. I just found out that faith isn't it. You know, prayer can move the hand of God, but it doesn't always get him to do what you want him to do. And what I've learned in my years of being a believer and a pastor is, man, God works in mysterious ways. My grandma had almost no education. She grew up in Okie. She came over during the Dust Bowl. Some of my uncles can't even read, you know. We are not an educated bunch. But I cannot improve on her theology. She always just said, the Lord works in mysterious ways. And he does. He does. And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One is, he barely ever tells us his plan. Can we agree on that? Okay. I think I know a couple of reasons why. One reason is because our brains are too small and we wouldn't understand the plan even if he told us. Like, I'm not good at arithmetic. I don't think I'm going to get trigonometry, right? The other reason I think is because if we know how far up the stairs we were supposed to go, we probably wouldn't want to do the first step. I think we'd just be intimidated out of action. The day I became a Christian, if I knew God was going to call me to pastor a family with 4 daughters and also pastor an actual church, I would have been like, nah, I'm good. But he had a plan, and I'm living it, willfully or not. So I think a couple reasons we don't know his plan is because our brains can't contain it, and a lot of times it's for our good, actually. It's better for us not to know. But back to what I was actually preaching on. Because the Lord works in mysterious ways, and because faith doesn't have a direct correlation with what God does or does not do in terms of how we act in this world and how we observe it, the relationship between faith and miracles is very complicated. And some of you are very angry with God because he didn't do something you asked him to do. And I just want you to know, you can be angry, you can protest. Imagine this man who buried his daughter. Right, I have 4 daughters. And I was looking through old pictures of them the other day. And I saw a picture of them when they were 7th grade. And I thought, if I lost a daughter when she was 12 years old, what's right about that? What makes any sense of that? The parents should go first, just the way it is. And when that rhythm is broken, it doesn't work that way. It's not supposed to feel right. I don't even know if you're supposed to heal from it, to be honest. Like, some injuries probably should be permanent. Some permanent grief isn't a bad thing. There's just nothing right about that. Well, in this case, the Lord shows grace. So if you're upset with God, you can be angry, you can protest, you can lament, you can grieve, of course. You can even be angry with the Lord. It actually doesn't mean you don't have faith. You've read the Psalms, right? The Psalms is the biggest book in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament. There's 150 of them. And one of them is huge. Psalm 119 is massive. And a lot of these Psalms are people just complaining to God. Sometimes they're cussing God out. They're being very honest with God. And that's in the Bible. Right? So if faith isn't intellectual assent, if faith isn't emotions, if faith isn't twisting the arm of God and negating what you want him to do, what is it? Faith is when you act because of Jesus. And you leap into Jesus. You don't leap into addiction or to work or to anything else. You leap into the Lord. That's what faith is. It doesn't say we think by faith, we feel by faith. No, we walk by faith, not by sight. faith does things, and it motivates you to choose the Lord. So here's the question. If you want to know if you have faith, when's the last time you did something and faith motivated it? When's the last time you took a risk just because Jesus asked you to? When's the last thing you changed in your life, not to modify it, not for self-improvement, not because you thought it was a good idea, but when's the last time you took something to the Lord and it changed because of him? Now some of you thinking, I don't know if I have faith. I don't remember the last time. Am I going to hell? Probably. Just kidding. Here's the thing about that. If you're worried about how much faith you have, either you have it or you're about to have it. Okay? So don't worry about it. Forget about it. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. If you're worried about it, you're very close to the kingdom or you're in the kingdom. So don't worry about it. Here's what I would worry about. How do I live today toward that huge gap in life between the things I have to do and the things I know? How do I live today to where I jump into Jesus? Have you ever had a friend who was in a situation where they felt like they had no good options when it came to the future, when it came to how to live, when it came to how to vote, right? People just felt like they had no good options. If we walk by faith and not by sight, then we'll see the glory of the Lord and we'll find his salvation. Promise you, it won't look like what you're thinking of today, but it'll be much better. So here's your homework. In the morning, spend some time with the Lord and ask him, okay, what does walking by faith look like today for me? You notice I'm not saying, hey, you need to be in a church building to have faith, or you have to be out of a church building. That's not it. Wake up in the morning, okay, what does me living by faith and walking by faith look like today? What's the risk I'm supposed to take for the Lord? Am I supposed to make that phone call, forgive that person? Am I supposed to pray this prayer? Sometimes prayer is its own risk, right? And then at the end of the day, just sit with the Lord for a minute and I'll say, okay, what risks did I take today for Jesus? Where today did I jump into Jesus when I could have jumped into other things? How did faith motivate me to act today? The good news is you don't have to know a million things or feel a million things to be a Christian. And the good news is you have to live life every day anyway. So if you just live it for the Lord, you're golden. Jesus asked this question of his disciples once. He said, when the Son of Man comes back to earth, you know what he's talking about, right? There's this book at the end of the Bible called Revelation, and it's insane. It talks about when Jesus comes back. And I won't get into it, but it's craziness. And when he comes back, it's awesome. And the short version, the Cliff Notes, is just Jesus wins, right? So he comes back, Jesus wins, evil is vanquished, sickness is gone, suffering is gone, separation from other people is gone, things are healed. But he asked this question of his disciples. He says, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on earth? Let's make sure he does. Let's pray. Lord, I love you and thank you so much that you raised this guy's daughter. I love you and thank you so much that you healed this woman and gave her life back. Lord, I pray for everyone here today in this church, everyone listening online. Lord, give us faith. Increase our faith. Help us to live and walk by faith. Help us not to have immature concepts of doubt or uncertainty, but help us to take risks, to jump into you. Lord, I pray that you'd find faith at Timberview when you return. That you find faith in us. Lord, help us to encourage one another in the faith. Lord, for those who are just struggling right now, life is difficult, things are heavy. Lord, I pray faith to kind of faith we talked about today. Not a trite, shallow faith, Lord, but a faith where they can risk prayer. They can risk grief. But for those who are doing well, Lord, I pray that they too would organize their lives around you and live by faith. Lord, help us to be people of faith.